My name is Sheena Heaton, and I'm a member of St. Peter's Church in Mainey, Sutton Coldfield. Together with John Heywood, who will speak shortly, I am a member of Eco Mainey, St. Peter's Environmental Group. John and I are both members of BACA and of Diocesan Synod, while John is also on the DAC and is a member of the Diocesan Net Zero Environment Group. We are also joined by Claire Carter from Knoll Church. Claire is a food blogger with a particular interest in environmental issues, and she will talk about food and plastic waste, fair trade, and she will also give us some practical suggestions for sustainable living. In the first part of this evening's presentation, I want to tell you a bit about St. Peter's Eco story. And as I do so, I will be highlighting what I see as key points in our progress. We started about 10 years ago when we decided to set reducing our carbon footprint as one of our transforming church targets. We set up an eco group, Eco Mainey, with encouragement from a couple of people who were already very committed to environmental matters. We were also lucky to have great support from our vicar at the time. Eco Mainey became a formal committee of the PCC with agendas, minutes, and the requirement to report to every meeting of the PCC. This is key point 1. I can't emphasize enough the importance of making your eco group disciplined and accountable. Otherwise, it is far too easy to become a talking shop, and little actually gets done. So what did we do? After a long struggle and lots of negotiation with the DAC, planning authorities, and the Victorian Society, who were the worst, we installed solar panels on our church roof. The delays meant that people became really interested in what was happening, and this gave a boost to our environmental credentials. It also got people thinking about environmental matters. We celebrated the installation with a special service, and this is another key point. Always celebrate any successes or achievements because this enthuses people and makes them feel part of something, which increases their commitment. Another key point is to make some quick wins, as this again makes people feel good and become more supportive. So we switched all our energy to a green energy provider. We installed LED bulbs, asking people to sponsor one or more bulbs. At the time we did this, LED bulbs were much more expensive, and I think we paid about £10 each for them. But they are much cheaper now and can be bought in bulk. So if you don't already have LEDs, that could be a very good starting point. We set up a tradecraft stall monthly and started to use only fair trade products in the church and hall, including fair trade communion wine. We also try to influence hall users to do the same. We changed to recycled paper and eco-friendly cleaning products. We set up a working party to care for the church grounds. We meet once a month when times are back to normal and just about manage to keep things under control. This photograph is Tower Walk, which is a pathway through our church grounds between two busy roads in Sutton Coldfield. Lots of local non-church people use it, and when we're working, people are always saying what a joy it is to be able to walk through a green space away from the traffic and the noise. At the last reckoning, we had over 40 species of native wildflowers in Tower Walk. We encourage bee-friendly plants, the cubs put up bird boxes, and the brownies planted bulbs. So another key point is to take every opportunity you have to engage with your congregation, your young people, and local people, and inform them of what you are doing on the eco front. Key point 4 brings us to the importance of prayer and worship. Quite early on, we decided that we must build prayer for the environment into our parish prayer calendar. And so we have an eco topic at least once a month, and more often in Lent and Creation Tide. We make a big thing of the season of Creation Tide with the Green Communion on all 4 Sundays, and we hold a shared lunch and harvest celebration on the final Sunday. We have had a number of very successful Bring Your Pet to Church Sundays and have invited speakers from Arosha and other churches to preach on the environment. In March 2019, we had a special service to celebrate Earth Hour, when people around the world turn off their lights for 1 hour, and this includes the floodlights on very many famous buildings. Though it was a bit cold in church and difficult at times to see the service sheets by candlelight, it was a great success. Plans to hold something similar in 2020 had to be cancelled, but we hope to repeat it when we're back to normal. Throughout our journey, we have worked hard to keep the congregation informed and involved. We make sure we write an article on eco matters for every edition of the church newsletter. About 5 years ago, we started to use Lent as a time to ask people to make changes to their personal lives. The first year was a Lent challenge on reducing plastic use. We included information and tips every week in the pew sheet. The following year, we took our laptops into coffee and encouraged people to find out their carbon footprint by using one of the online tools available. The next year, we did an online environmental quiz. We were able to provide help to those who were not very computer literate, and that brings me to key point 5. You have to encourage people on their own eco journey by providing information and help as necessary. For example, include links to click on for easy access, or help those who struggle with IT. We found organising a local litter pick with the Cubs and Scouts was a great way to engage with the wider community, as is using social media. Our new vicar is a whiz with IT, and she has used Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to keep in touch with people throughout the pandemic. Using social media also helps to engage with younger people who are often deeply concerned about the environment. For us, the environmental challenge is not just about personal and local issues. Part of the Eco Church survey has a focus on global engagement and the need to support those in developing countries. Ecomania meets regularly with our local MP, Andrew Mitchell, and at a meeting scheduled with him on the 17th of May, we intend to raise the issue of the cuts to the overseas aid budget. We have twinned all our toilets and make sure to donate to an environmental charity every year when we decide our charitable giving. We normally have a very successful Christian Aid Week, and members of our congregation have close links with St. John's Church in Nidirandi in Malawi. Which brings me to key point 7. I cannot emphasize enough how helpful Eco Church has been to our environmental journey. The Eco Church survey provides a framework to help you get started and to show you where you need to be going. It provides a discipline and helps to keep you focused. We got our Bronze Award in 2016 and then became the first Anglican church in the diocese to gain a Silver Award in 2018. Going for gold has proved a bit more difficult because of the pandemic, but we are working on it. So to sum up the chief points: 1, be disciplined and be accountable. 2, get some quick wins and celebrate successes. 3, keep people involved, both the church people and the wider community. 4, regular prayer, preaching, and special services are vital. 5, use a variety of methods to engage people. 6, involve children, young people, and uniformed organisations. And 7, sign up to Eco Church. We're now going to move into breakout rooms for discussion on why it is that so many churches are not more involved in environmental action. A disturbing statistic from our diocese is that in answers to the Archdeacon's questions about environmental matters in 2019, nearly half of all the churches in the diocese reported that they had no regular preaching or intercession for the environment. Now, this is crazy. We do prayer and preaching all the time, so it doesn't involve extra resources. It is the very least that we should be doing. We in Bacca have been concerned for some time as to why so many churches are not involved with eco-church or in taking action to deal with the climate crisis. It would be really helpful if we could get from you some insight as to what you think is holding churches back. As I see it, the barriers are these: skepticism. Some people don't believe there's a problem, or they don't think that it will affect them. Money. This is obviously a real problem for many, but there are lots of things which can be done without much cost. And if we are to achieve net carbon zero by 2030 in our diocese, we will have to find the money somehow. Lack of time is another real problem, especially for overstretched clergy and church officers. There are too many other initiatives we often hear. And yes, there probably are. And everything is important, but I would venture to suggest that saving the planet is one of the most urgent. And then people say that no one is sufficiently interested or committed to doing anything about it. So what we would like you to discuss is this: what do you think is holding your church or other churches back? And what would help you to get started or make you more effective? We'll have 10 minutes for discussion. I will put the questions in the chat, and it would be helpful if each breakout group could put their comments and suggestions in the chat also. We'll then be able to analyze these and hopefully take some appropriate action.
Right, I think we're all back.
Thank you. That's lovely. 10 minutes is quite short, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I hope somebody managed to, I've got 1 or 2 points, and I hope everybody else managed to get something as well. We Bacca people will try to sort of put something together that we can send out later on. Well, now, thank you all for I'm now going to hand over to John Heywood, who will take us through the next part of the presentation. Over to you, John, wherever you are.
I'm here. So you're going to stop sharing.
Yes, I'm not sharing.
All right, I'm starting to share now.
Yes.
Right, sorry, I'm going to have to flick through the through these. Here we are. Okay, I'm John Heywood. When I came to Birmingham in the early 70s, I lived in Aston for over 20 years. And then I went to live in Gloucestershire and benefited from living in a county area where there was a wide interest in the environment. For instance, at the nearby Methodist church, they were doing eco-church already in 2008, and they were putting solar panels on their roof, and people at home were using biomass boilers, you know, so that they, in Gloucestershire, it sort of really inspired me. So that when I came back to Birmingham, I was very glad to find St. Peter's Maney and people of like-mindedness. And I'm just going to recap on why we're doing what we're suggesting in this session. It's because we've all been charged by God to look after his earth, and also because we've driven on by the science, as Greta Thunberg tells us, that it's, as people were told in the first session of our sessions, we have got to make changes by 2030 because there are so many carbon emissions already stored up in our atmosphere that we have got to stop topping it up by that sort of time. Now, so no more emissions for the science reason, but also because the Church of England, both the diocese and the General Synod, have made the decision that that's the way we're going to go. Now, perhaps we've also got to then decide, you know, how can we make this sort of change, which is also will be justified by what people are calling climate justice, because it's the rich and the industrial nations that have caused the problem, and it's the poor that are suffering most. For, you know, there's all these storms and droughts and hunger in Malawi, you know, our sister diocese in Africa, which if we're going to do this, then we need to pay attention to the fifth mark of mission, which of course tells us that we're going to strive to look after our earth. And why I've put a picture of a hand up there is to emphasize that we're hoping you'll see that this isn't really a new initiative. This isn't something to weigh you down. This is what we're doing all the time. We're putting out the hand of friendship and mission towards people. And of course, when you put out your hand, you're putting out all five fingers, you know, and for me, that represents the 5 marks of mission, you know, that, you know, care for creation is just one of the things we're doing all the time. And in particular, we're hoping to suggest to you tonight that you might take up this program that's being called Climate Sunday. Now, I hope you'll see that Climate Sunday is going to be something that will help you all, because you won't have to write the liturgies, you won't have to choose the prayers, you won't have to choose the hymns, because that's all being done for you by Churches Together in Britain and Ireland. The same people who sponsor Christian Aid. What they're asking you is that you'll take on and do 5 things. The first thing is to hold a climate service before the end of August. Now, if you've got some doubts about it, you want to see that in practice, there are we know of at least 3 services that are being done in early June, and the links will be on the slides and information that we're sending out. The second thing is that as part of registering your service, you'll be encouraged to, as a parish, to sign up to the commitment, which is called The Time Is Now, and that can be done both by the parish and by individuals. So you can possibly make an event out of that, getting people to sign up in a church service, for instance. And then the next thing we're asked to do is to join in the national celebration of Climate Sunday, which is going to be held on September the 5th with a special service in Glasgow Cathedral. And then the last thing we're being asked to do is to get out and meet our MPs. And we can do that because this is a Churches Together initiative. We don't have to do it just as Church of England. We can meet with fellow Christians from other denominations, and we can also include other faiths. In Sutton, we've put out feelers towards the local mosque. They, we'll have to keep on encouraging them. They haven't said yes immediately. Now, why should you be wanting to talk to your MP and meet him about the climate crisis? That's because of this this conference that's going on called COP26. So I'm just going to digress a little bit and explain to you exactly what COP26 is. This is a UN conference that's going to be held in November in Glasgow, and it's the follow-up, the major follow-up to what happened in Paris in 2015. And COP stands for Conference of the Parties. So, which is, it's a very funny sort of acronym to be using, but it's clearly going to be a very serious issue. What's going to happen at Glasgow, because what is necessary for the survival of the Earth is that the promises and pledges that were made in Paris 6 years ago are actually turned into actions. So it's got, the days of promises are to end. We need serious plans that will result in actions. And we've got a particular responsibility because the United Kingdom is in the chair of the conference and therefore has got a responsibility to see that it is successful. And if our government is charged with doing that, then all our MPs have got a responsibility to keep the government up to the mark. And if our MPs are our representatives, then we've got a responsibility to make sure that our MP is working as hard as they possibly can. So that's why the Climate Sunday team are asking us to get out there and arrange a meeting with our MPs and tell the MPs that Christians are really deadly serious about this issue, that we're taking action ourselves, and will they make sure that this conference is a real success. Now, just to tell you, if you're not used to meeting your MP, I'm just going to explain that it's really not a difficult task. You can find out all about your MP from this website that's called They Work For You. You open up the website, put in the postcode of your church, and up will come your MP. Scroll down the page a bit. There's an email facility. You can send your MP an email, ask for a meeting. So that's easy. Then what you've got to do is find some like-minded people. And remember, of course, it's not only just your church. You'll be able to make links with other Church of England churches. You'll be able to make links through Churches Together with other churches. So get yourself a date and then have a pre-meeting and agree what it is you're going to ask, who'll be speaking, who'll be chairing the meeting. We don't know whether you'll have to do it on a Zoom link. You may, by the time you're doing this, you may actually be able to have a public meeting. I suggest that one of the good questions to ask them is, will they work with the other MPs in Birmingham Diocese? We've got some we know, as you've heard, that Andrew Mitchell in Sutton Coldfield meets with people. And we know that in 2015, he was on a platform before the Paris conference with Steve McCabe from Selly Oak. or is it Hall Green? Anyway, one of those southern constituencies, and then one of the churches in Northfield have made approaches to the fairly new MP Gary Sambrook. So if we could get the Birmingham diocese MPs working together, that would be a coup. That would improve the input on the government. Now, if you're feeling lacking in confidence, there's a specialist Christian charity that gives help for people who want to impress their MP, and that's called Hope for the Future. And we'll be giving you their website in the information. Now, in terms of talking to the MPs, what we've got to suggest to them is that they can get improvements on what our government has suggested so far. If you were at the first talk in this series, you'll have noticed that government plans at the moment are only taking into account half of the carbon emissions that this country emits. Which is because, as we've stopped manufacturing a lot of things ourselves, we've outsourced our carbon emissions to other countries. And also, those calculations by the government don't take any note of the emissions from flying in aeroplanes or from shipping. So we've got to get the government, and if the government is chairing this conference, they need to have good plans that are not going to be criticised by the other people coming to the conference. And then the other thing the MPs can get the government to do, is to start ironing out the inconsistencies and the lack of coordination in the plans they've announced so far. I'll just give you some examples of these sort of contradictions. At the moment, they're still proposing to having a third runway at Heathrow, even though we know that that flying is something that we need to reduce. And then the second example is the way that on the day that they announced that they were going to reduce the subsidy to us for buying an electric vehicle, they proposed to spending £27 billion on road infrastructure. Government is still paying heavy subsidies to oil and gas firms. That again is contrary to their need to get carbon emissions down. And then if you look at at housing, back in 2015, 2016, they were going to mandate that all new build houses were going to be built to sustainable building standards. Then as they cancelled that proposal, they've now spent 6 years building houses that have got to then be expensively retrofitted. That's just balmy as far as many of us are concerned. So these are the sorts of things that we need to impress our MPs to get changed. And of course, we must remember that that the climate crisis is an international problem, and that our country isn't going to be safe until all the countries are safe. It's the same mantra that we're hearing about the COVID pandemic. So that if we're cutting our aid budget, then we're going to be cutting the money that the poorer countries could be using for their transition to less carbon emissions. And also, if we're cutting education, then we're also going to be making birth control programs harder to implement. So these are the sort of international ideas that have got to be got across by our MPs. Because as I said earlier, it's the it's us industrial northern countries that that have raised the level of carbon emissions, and it's causing the suffering in the other parts of the world. Now, we hope that today that we realize we've been bombarding you with an awful lot of information, but please, you know, when you get the PowerPoint slides, sift through the information and take the bits that are going to be helpful to you. You know, we're putting out a lot of ideas so that you can choose between them. As Sheena said, the Eco Church survey is a great starting point and will, you know, can take you a long, long way. And then in terms of resources, you've got the information on the Climate Sunday website. There's that Birmingham Diocese has got environmental pages. The C of E nationally have got an environment program. So you've got lots to choose from. That, and then also the bishop has set up an environment board that is going to steer the diocesan program up to 2030, and as part of that, he's mandated the area deans to create steering groups on the climate crisis, and the idea is that there will be maybe someone who will be a champion for every deanery, who will have contacts with every single parish in the deanery, and then there will be links between the 6 deaneries as well, so that we can really try and coordinate and encourage each other. And then you'll probably start to hear about the Net Zero Environment Group, which is the group that the bishop has set up to give advice on how buildings can be changed and adaptations can be made to heating and lighting and things like that, as in this run up to 2030. And of course, we have to give a plug to BACA, who's as a group of keen people have got this set of courses going. And obviously, you know about us. If you're here, you must have heard of us. And we're going to be giving you in the slides and other information about books, you know, people to contact. And we're also suggesting that we're emphasizing that the praying and sermons and testimonies, you know, are not going to cost you money, and there will be people to key into in your congregation. You know, they could be young or old. You know, just look round for the people who are interested. And here's a last suggestion I'm making is that you can use good old David Attenborough. You know, there's a link to a film that you can use, maybe have that instead of a sermon one week. And and I'm now going to hand on to Claire from Knoll Church, who's going to, as Sheena said, talk more extensively about food and plastic. So I'm going to stop my sharing, which gives Claire the opportunity to take things on.
Okay. Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you. My name's Claire Carter. I'm from Knoll Parish Church. I'm also a food blogger, and I blog about food, about sustainable food, and also about sustainable living. This is something I've been doing for quite a few years. So I'm really happy to be able to speak to you today and hopefully give you some good tips that you can incorporate in your own lives and kind of encourage things to happen in your congregation as well. So inspiring our communities and congregations to take action in their own home, I think, is really crucial to tackling the climate emergency, and it's going to help reinforce the importance of all the steps we take as a church, as well as helping our congregations to really feel involved in a common goal and a part of the solution. Climate action, I always say to people, it's a lifelong journey. You know, people will be at different places in their journeys, and we can help and encourage people wherever they are. Each small change really matters, and small changes can lead to cultural change, which can add up to making a really big difference. So why food? Well, food is a really great place to start. It's an essential part of our everyday. And actually, CO2 emissions from food make up just over 1/4 of all the world's CO2 emissions, which means that changes around food can have a significant impact. There is lots that we can do around food to reduce our carbon footprint. And it's a great example of a way in which we can encourage individual as well as collective action in our churches. So let's look first of all at where all this carbon comes from when we're talking about food. First of all, the carbon emissions are produced during the whole life cycle of food, how it's farmed, how it's transported and where it's transported to. For example, air freighting has a much higher carbon footprint than shipping. How it's stored and how long it's stored for. Is our food sold straight away, or is it kept in cold storage for long periods of time? And finally, how much of our food is wasted? So we're just going to have a quick look at those areas and look at different choices we can make to reduce our carbon footprint. So you might have heard talk about a sustainable diet, and people always ask, well, what is a sustainable diet? It can be quite tricky to pin down. To start with, a sustainable diet is a diet that is eating food that is produced in season and close to where you live. So locally sourced food obviously means a reduction in emissions from food miles. Eating food in season means there's no emissions produced from energy that would be needed to grow food out of season and then to store it. So that is a good place to start. However, the real big deal when it comes to diet is this one. It's reducing meat and dairy. Scientists are in agreement now that the biggest change that we can make is to reduce our meat and dairy consumption and build in some meat-free days into our diet. Now, for some people, this is going to lead to them going vegan. And for others, it's going to lead to maybe one meat-free day per week. Wherever we are, any small change that we can make in this area is really going to matter. And let me show you why. The carbon impact of reducing meat and dairy is actually quite significant. Sorry, flicked on too much then. So I've done a lot of research around this, and there's a very detailed report that's been done by Oxford University, and they found that if everybody in the UK replaced just one red meat-based meal with one vegan or plant-based meal per week, it would have the environmental impact of taking 16 million cars off the road, which is obviously quite a significant impact just for one small change. That's because meat and dairy produce considerably more greenhouse gases than plant-based foods. To give you an example, 1 kilogram of beef produces around 60 kilograms of greenhouse gases. If we compare that to a kilogram of, say, peas, for example, 1 kilogram of peas produce 1 kilogram of greenhouse gases. So incorporating more plant-based meals into our diets can have a significant impact on our carbon footprint that comes from food. Whilst a vegan diet in many cases is better for the environment, eating a varied diet that includes smaller amounts of animal products is, I think, a lot more realistic and achievable for most people. And as I say, everybody will be in a different place on that scale. So as well as reducing our meat and dairy, we can also choose higher animal welfare products. So when we do eat meat products and fish, we can choose products that have been produced to high animal welfare standards. This is not only better for the animal, it's also slightly better for our carbon emissions. Now, it's fair to say that all meat and fish production isn't the same. There are significant differences in the CO2 production and greenhouse gas production of industrially or intensively farmed foods, for example, versus free range and organic food. So choosing sustainably farmed products is also going to help. Now, it might surprise you to hear that the world already produces enough food to feed 10 billion people. That's compared to a global population at the moment of just under 8 billion. Industrial farming practices, they can be quite harmful to plant and animal life and cause long-term damage to the environment through, for example, soil degradation, deforestation, which can lead to flooding and pollution. And some of this damage can last decades. So choosing products that have been sustainably or organically farmed can help protect our long-term ability to grow food. Organic farming would also help protect the farm workers themselves, who can suffer serious health issues at times from the chemicals used in industrial farming. And this brings us nicely onto fair trade. So supporting fair trade is a direct way to help many of those who are already affected by climate change. The Fair Trade Foundation promotes sustainable farming practices and is doing a lot of work around climate action and helping farmers adapt to delivering a lower carbon footprint product. In many cases, a lot of fair trade products also happen to be organic, just because that's the best thing for the land and for the farmers themselves. So once we've produced our food and we've shipped it and we've bought it and we brought it home, the next thing we need to look at is reducing the food waste, of course. In 2020, about one third of all the food produced globally was wasted. 1/3 of the food globally equates to enough to feed about 3 billion people. Now, that means that not only have all the resources that have gone into producing that food been wasted, the actual process itself of wasting the food also releases a gas called methane, which is much, much stronger than CO2. It's another greenhouse gas. If food waste was a country, it would actually be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the US and China. So I hope those statistics will kind of help us realise that food waste is a massive problem. It's a big issue in our homes. In fact, in the UK, the majority of food waste is actually created in our homes, not by supermarkets or restaurants. It comes from our homes. So one of the things that we can do about this is just be really mindful of this in our own homes. In our churches, we can make sure that we've always got a plan for dealing with food waste at any events we host. For example, we can invite guests to bring Tupperware containers with them to take home any leftovers from church meals or events. We can be ready to compost what we can, and we can have a plan to donate any surplus food and anything that might be left over after events. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about today is plastics and packaging, mainly because this relates quite heavily to food. Plastic waste is a real problem. And although recycling is important, it's also important to remember that recycling does not solve the issue. Every single piece of plastic that has been produced since the 1950s still exists. We need to remind ourselves that plastic can only be recycled a certain number of times. And I was surprised to learn recently that the UK actually produces more plastic waste per person than any other country in the world, apart from the United States. A recent report by Greenpeace and other charities have recently found that less than 10% of our plastic waste in the UK is actually being recycled in the UK. The rest of it is being exported to countries in the global south that often can't cope with it, and it's being dumped or burnt. This not only causes environmental damage, it's also causing serious health problems to the local populations. If you want to find out more about that, there's a link in the notes that we're sending out. It's a report called No Time to Waste, which is written by Tear Fund, Fauna and Flora, Waste Aid and the Institute of Development Studies. They've done a very big report on that, so that's really interesting to read to find out more information. So the message is clear: we need to try and reduce our plastic waste as much as possible and not rely on recycling. When it comes to food, buying fruit and vegetables loose is a good place to start. Single-use plastic, we have to view it as a luxury that our planet cannot afford. Can we get used to, for example, taking a fork or spoon with us when we're out at the office, for example, to eat our lunch with, rather than using a disposable one? Can we get used to carrying a reusable water bottle with us or a reusable coffee cup rather than having to buy a single-use one? Can we look for reusable alternatives to single-use items in our daily lives and in our homes? There is so much opportunity here to do things in a better way and to make a difference. And because it accounts for such a significant amount of our CO2 emissions, food is a great place to start, and a really great place to come together as a church and as a community and pledge to make a difference together. I just want to leave you today with one of my favourite quotes around this, and it's this one from Anne-Marie Bonneau. We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. So as church communities, we can show what can be done, and we can help and encourage each other along the way, not only within our churches, but within our homes too. And as I said at the beginning, helping our congregations and communities to make changes in their own homes is crucial to tackling this climate emergency. I'm going to hand you back. Stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Claire. That was lovely. I'm just going to share my screen again. That doesn't look very good. Like Claire, I've got a favourite quotation also, and it really echoes Claire's final quotation. This is: the biggest thing that most of us do that contributes to climate change is to assume that what we do does not really matter. We underestimate our own capacity to contribute to a sustainable world. We're all capable of doing something to help the planet, and perhaps now is the right time to do it. This last year has been traumatic for us all, but we have coped, we have adapted, we have changed. And as our lives open up again, now is a good time to reset and to start anew. And remember, we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to do everything all at once. We do need to do something. And I can assure you that it gets easier. At Maney, we have found that when we work together as a church family, we get support and encouragement from one another. We learn together, we share our knowledge, celebrate our achievements, and develop new ways of doing things, which in many cases have become second nature. There is no doubt that our eco journey has enhanced the life of our church, and I hope and pray that it will do so for you all also. And now we come to a time of questions. If anybody has anything that they want to ask, you can either put it in the chat box or just raise your hand in the normal way. So any hands up? Was something in the chat box now. Ray and Peter Lewis say, Greta Thunberg says no one is too small to make a difference. And that's absolutely true. And even if it's only something as simple as taking a plastic cup or a coffee cup or a renewable water bottle or whatever, we can all make small changes.
I think that, I mean, that is the great start, Sheena, but I think we've all, you know, that Climate Sunday is leading us to also to, as Eco Church does, to start looking outwards as well. It's not just individual salvation, it's climate justice we're after. But my survey of the chat boxes would say that I think perhaps money is one of the key points that people are pointing to. And obviously we don't have an answer to that entirely, or not really at all. I think we have to remember that, you know, that we're, as Church of England, we're part of a much bigger organisation, and BACA has certainly started raising the issue at diocesan level, you know, that some sort of fund will have to be developed to work us towards net zero, and we think that that'll then be passed on up to the to national level as well. And we also have to remember that this is, you know, we've got another 8.5 years to go. So as parishes, we could also maybe start something like a climate levy, you know, asking people to top up their already generous giving by, you know, a little bit, you know, to you know, to do the things like the LED lights.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the floor?
Margaret Healy-Pollitt is saying something.
Right.
Yes, John, Sheena, which is your green energy company? Who's your green energy supplier?
I think it's green energy. Is that right, John?
We've got such a responsible treasurer. I've never asked him which particular company it is.
There are.
What I put into the chat as a reply to you is
yes,
that the diocese recommends two brokerage schemes that help you with that. There's Green Journey and there's Parish Buying. But if you look at the information put out by people like Which, there are probably only two completely green energy electricity suppliers. That's Good Energy and Ecotricity.
I think that's right, and I think Parish Buying, who recommend total renewables, I think I just don't know how they claim that that's 100% renewable energy. I think it's greenwash.
Well, that issue has been brought to the attention of the National Environment Programme, and they, you know,
Good.
The
Yes.
DEOs keep on nagging them about that.
But I think if you're, I mean, we're tied into a contract with them, but if you're looking to change, you know, Good Energy and Ecotricity are the ones to go for, although they might be a bit more expensive. But if you really want the 100% renewable. Those are the companies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's encouraging to know that, because I switched to good energy some time ago and it was more expensive, but I have, for environmental reasons, that's why I did it. That's in my home.
That green energy is going to come down in price. So hopefully, you know, extra costs might only be for a short time. And I think this is one of the areas that we might look at, in that better off churches might be able to help the poorer churches for that short period of time that it will be necessary to make a difference between, you know, cheaper energy and green energy.
Can I make another point? I'm sorry. I don't want to hog this, but
There's always one.
there's always one. Talking about raising money for things, if any churches are interested in installing solar PV, there's an organisation, Community Energy Society, called Power for Good, and John knows all about Power for Good, as do a few other people here. But that is a way of the richer churches supporting churches that are less well off, actually, in installing solar panels. So yes, if anyone wants to know more about Power for Good, John or me or Beryl, or and there are several other members here as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Any further questions? Yes, Hilary.
I have one for Claire. I really I appreciate the whole evening. It's been amazing. Claire, I have a question for you. You talked about how consuming less dairy is really important, and for our churches, even though some of us may be vegan, not everyone would be, and I wouldn't expect everyone would be. But is there a way that you would say to encourage people to try the non-dairy milk in their tea or coffee, or do you just sort of have it there as an option? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think the whole, well, firstly, it's important that people understand the reason why. And I think, often when we talk about these things in groups such as this, it's a message that we've heard before. And for quite a lot of people, the dairy thing is something they've not even considered. So I think, within our churches, talking about things, being encouraging and saying, well, this is something that you could try and this is why, and then having non-dairy options there available for people if they so wish. It's not about saying to people, you absolutely have to do this. It's a journey. This is a lifelong journey. We're not going to get to a point next year where we say we're finished, we're done. We can go back to how we were before. These changes are things that we're going to have to live with this. This has got to be a way of life. So I think, helping people to understand why it's important, and then letting them choose. I think that's all we can do, really.
Thank you.
I believe that Innocent has had his hand up for a while, and I've missed him. I'm sorry.
Yes. We're anxious to reduce emission, but more cars are being made that are capable of emitting more. Why is that? The other thing I want to stress is, if we all turn vegetarians, are the farmers geared up to produce more vegetables? That's my question.
Thank you. I think the trouble with cars is I have a real bee in my bonnet about SUVs, which apparently Claire talked about food waste being the third largest emitter. Well, if SUVs were a country, they would be the seventh largest emitter of CO2 in the world. But it's a status symbol, isn't it? It's a fashion item, if you like. And I don't know how. I think we talk to people as much as possible. I mean, apart from everything else, so a blow from one of those cars would obliterate a toddler. I mean, I worry sick about my grandchildren at their nursery, where most of the cars seem to be SUVs. But, you know, we've got to talk to people and influence people. And if we do drive a SUV ourselves, then we need to think about why we do so, and maybe reconsider the next time that we change our car.
If I could just give a quick answer, Sheena, on to the Innocent's question about farming. We certainly heard that the C of E nationally has got a representative and is working hard on the new government agricultural policy. So I hope and suspect that sort of thinking will be being fed into the government policy. There's a couple of other people with their hands up. There's Nick Brown and then Roger. Should we take Nick first?
Yeah, it's to colleagues from St. Peter's Mainey, so probably yourself, John, and Sheena. How much, and I put this in the chat, how much has your church reduced its carbon output through this initiative of going to bronze and then silver eco levels? Can you quantify the change you've made? Thank you. I
don't think we can. Can you, John? Are you? But we have, with the solar panels, we have reduced our electricity consumption quite appreciably. That is certainly something that we have done.
Yes, I mean, we know that at St. Richard's in Lee Hall, the solar panels there have reduced their bills by half. So that will then, I mean, that will again have a similar sort of knock on. I know that actually, you know, so that's a good question for us. We'll have to try and quantify that.
Well, I think it begs some questions around the effort effectiveness of what we do, so to ensure that our actions do, you know, deliver the biggest carbon reduction that we can for what we're doing across all fronts.
We'll feed that into the net zero group, you know, as something that we'll want to get out of the results. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, one of the most important things that any church can do at the moment is to let Dan May's team, the diocesan property team, have the record of your energy usage, because that's going to form the baseline of how calculations are made for the future. And you can't reduce something if you don't know what you started with, so to speak. And so that's a very easy, quick win that can be done.
So Roger now?
Yes.
You have to unmute.
Roger, can you unmute?
Very quickly, the Swiss government opted everybody into green energy. It cost them 6% initially, 81% remained in, if you like. And now Switzerland, of course, has probably got cheaper green energy than fossil fuel energy. And I think that's a good lesson, perhaps, for the leaders of the church. Super talk from Claire, but I think in the back of the group, we must be careful, that we're aware of what's going on. I mean, we wouldn't like to dispense with plastics in medicine, for example, because that would be very tricky, and there are other uses of plastic. So we shouldn't condemn it outright, but we should certainly get rid of it where we're using it stupidly. And even Coca-Cola are now doing pilot projects to go plastic free. And I think we should be aware of that and support them, and say, when we go to the shops, you know, you've got your Coca-Cola plastic free containers yet. And we should be aware of that sort of activity. And food waste, of course, is terribly important. I think it starts right at the manufacturing process, of course, where obviously the manufacturers want to reduce it, but there's so much waste in farms as well. And it was an excellent presentation, and thank you, Claire, for that. Thank you.
Well, folks, it's gone 9:15, so unless there's anything very urgent, I think we should probably draw this to a close. Thank you all for your questions and for your interest. We hope you found the evening useful. The list of resources will be sent to you along with the slides, and all three of us are happy to answer any questions by individual email inquiries that you might have. The final session in this series of talks will take place at the same time next week, when Beryl Moppet and Heather Holmes will lead on how EcoChurch can help everyone to play their part in mitigating the climate crisis. Speakers from churches with no EcoChurch award through to those with a gold award will encourage us to go on the EcoChurch journey. We will also hear from Paul Brasher, the Diocesan Malawi Partnership Officer, on the climate challenges in Malawi and how we can continue to give support. And as we look to the future, Patrick Gerard, Bishop David's advisor for the environment, will speak on the positive moves that the Church of England is taking nationally. And so, let us finish with a prayer. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, you have taught us through your servant St. Francis that all creation is your handiwork. Grant us your grace that we may exercise wide stewardship of this earth. Tread lightly upon it. Cherish its resources. That our children may enjoy its riches throughout all generations, and your name be glorified through all that you have made. Amen.
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 Good night and thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.